All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the TBD Pod. Today we have Fentrice Driskell. She is the House Minority Leader of the House of Representatives here in Florida. She has an undergraduate degree from Harvard University. She was the first African-American student to be elected to the Harvard Undergraduate Council, which is like the president of the student body, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing. Georgetown Law after that, and a Florida native from Polk County. Welcome, Fentrice.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. So I wanted to talk to you because obviously Florida has a lot of issues and they're wide, right? It's not any one thing that our state seems to have a problem with. Granted, we live in a beautiful place. A lot of people are moving here. There is a lot of good in Florida.
Yeah.
But there are some challenges, insurance challenges. There's some societal things, right? With social issues and stuff like that that are being talked about in a heavy way right now. News just broke the whistleblower for this park fiasco where they wanted to build golf courses on our public parks. He just got fired by the Florida Environmental Protection Agency. A lot of stuff going down. And you're kind of at the center of it all, right? Like, what a tough time to be the minority leader, right? You represent the Democrats.
That's right.
Here in Florida, which is such a right-leaning charged place since COVID, I'll say. Since COVID, for sure. What is it like? I mean, it just seems like you are in this position that has a lot of heat and a lot of eyes. And it almost feels like any change you'd want to make would be hard to do because of the nature of our state politics. Is that correct?
A few thoughts. The first is, I don't concede that we're a hard right state. We perform as a red state.
Yeah.
We perform as a red state. But what I know when I knock doors, when I talk to my neighbors, and keep in mind, my district was actually represented by a Republican before I ran. And now the boundaries have changed some post-redistricting, but the heart of my district is effectively the same as it's been since I was first elected.
Yeah.
A lot of folks really are concerned more about the economic issues. They're concerned about affordable housing. They're concerned about the property insurance crisis. They are exhausted by the culture wars. The challenge becomes whether or not those feelings translate into votes. So I would say that on the center left, Florida has a turnout problem in terms of getting people to show up at the polls and actually exercise that vote, which would help move our politics in a different way.
Yeah. And I should clarify. I guess Florida's not a hard right state for sure. And we never were. We were always middle road. And I always thought Florida had reasonable laws. My dad was a judge here. And so I kind of always grew up watching these different laws play out. And I always thought that makes sense. Like, oh, Florida does that. That makes sense. Whereas other states would have different policies that seemed extreme to me, or I don't know, things that I didn't agree with. But Florida was always middle ground. And politically, we were middle ground. It was always one way or the other. It just seems like since COVID, it's like, boom, shot to the right. Can we talk about COVID for a second too? I just want to ask you this. There was so much discretion during COVID with the different governors choosing different ways to go about what to do. I think DeSantis got very popular because he kept us open and he kept things rolling, right? Whereas other states that were shut down got crushed. Does in general, do the Democrats feel like at that time that was the right call for our state with hindsight?
I mean, did those states get crushed? They seem to be doing just fine, right? Like Michigan and California are doing just fine.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks forget that in the early days of the pandemic, DeSantis did shut down the state. He did push for vaccinations. He held special events and used it for his own political gain to make sure that seniors were first in line. And I'm not saying that that's bad for seniors to be first in line, by the way. I'm just saying it's interesting that people remember the latter part of his response and not so much the first part.
Yeah.
And then it was such a strange thing to me that people, it's like they just stopped. It felt like a lot of folks just stopped caring so much about the numbers that were racking up in terms of the tens of thousands of Floridians who were dying during that time frame. I think people also forget that DeSantis, for all that he has said and tried to proclaim himself to be a business-friendly governor, he actually there was a lot of government overreach during that time, I felt, where state government was telling businesses what they could and could not do in terms of whether or not they wanted to have a mask policy or whatever they wanted that policy to be. There was also a lot of overreach with respect to local governments. And keep in mind that, while DeSantis got to have the headlines, I'm keeping the state open and I'm keeping the state free, a lot of the responsibility for actually managing the crisis was falling on local governments. So I guess I say all of that to say he used that public health tragedy to really bolster his own name ID nationwide. But the way that he handled that pandemic certainly was mixed. And no, I do not think that that is the way that my caucus would have handled it.
Yeah, and hindsight's 2020, right? I think at that time no one knew what the hell was happening. But it's funny you say people forget. I actually kind of forgot in the very beginning. Everyone was on that same page, right? Pushing for vaccines, pushing for masks, and then there was a shift. Personally, I believe it was the right call to stay open as long as we did. But I also feel like DeSantis got a huge target on his back because he went against what so many other states did. And then he's just like this bulldog kind of guy to me that when he's pushed, he just pushes in the opposite direction tenfold. And I think that's actually why the presidential run didn't go well, right? I think that's why I think that's why Florida in general got more disappointed in him in that second term because he went almost too hard on certain issues and it turned people off. Whereas right out of COVID, he was very popular. He won, he did great, and then he started going further and he started pushing further. And I think that's where he went wrong. He should have taken a step back and let some of those things play out, but he didn't do that. And it shows in the voting. He was not popular at all when he ran. People did not want him to be president because he was almost pushing too hard, and you can't do that. You have to be somewhat middle ground.
Oh, you were looking for my response?
Well, we're just having we're just talking,
Yeah, it's cool. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to jump in. Yeah, I guess what I would say about that is it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the top of our conversation, which is that people are just trying to live, man. They're just trying to live. Like if they have kids, they want them to go to a good school.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to take a vacation once in a while. They want to know they're going to have a retirement. Like they want a good job. People get tired of that. It's a lot of foolishness. It's like, what stunt next? Remember when he was sending, he did that political stunt where he was sending folks who were coming to America seeking asylum in Texas. First of all, pause. You're the governor of Florida. What business do you have in Texas, right? And so you're spending our taxpayer dollars to send not Floridians from not Florida to not Florida.
Well, and then he did this thing where he sent the whole truckload of people up to Martha's Vineyard, which on one hand is like a cheeky, funny thing, if you align with that ideologically. Whatever, haha. But is that the most effective? And that's what I was saying about some of those things he did. That's why he's become unpopular, or more certainly more unpopular, right? Is because he did things that were like combative and too hard line and almost like proddy.
Yeah. Well, I learned this statistic. It's probably a year or two old now, but it was talking about the number of Americans who feel like their government cares about them, or the number of Americans percentage-wise who think they could get their government to listen to them. And it was something abysmal, like 4%. We're living in a time where people feel left behind oftentimes. They feel like they are unheard. And then you overlay that with a governor in Florida who's been about suppressing people's stories, right? AP African American history. We don't need that here in Florida, right? That's been more of his, I don't want to even call it leadership, but that's the direction that he's trying to take the state. And a lot of it is so divisive.
Yeah.
And that's not the Florida that I grew up in. I don't know if you feel like that was the Florida you grew up in, but I just have always felt that, like you said, we have people who are at different places with their ideology, but we've always kind of understood that we want to be a part of this country and we want to be a part of something great. We want to be a part of moving this country to reach its highest ideals. And unfortunately, we've had a governor for the past, I guess, going on, 6 years now, who has used this position to further his own ambition. And there are a lot of folks, I think, who are feeling left behind in that.
And I agree with you, and I think no one wants to see that. Even the Republicans in my family don't want to see that. I'm a pretty middle ground dude. Personally, I think that on the pandemic thing, staying open really helped us. We've thrived through that for those reasons, but also the points you brought up, I completely agree with, right? The poking and the prodding doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the people of this state. And it completely adds to the fuel of this fire of this national political conversation we're having. And I believe it's the reason why those 4% of Americans give a shit, because the rest of them feel like it's all these politicians catfighting with each other. And when our governor of Florida is supposed to be inside of the state, looking at our issues, fixing our issues, if he's out in Texas at the border, I get the sentiment. I get why and everything. And there is a crisis over there. And I guess he's trying to help, whatever. We feel like we need you here, man. We need you here fixing our problems here. So I totally agree with you. I don't think that helps anything. I think every Floridian looks at some of those issues and goes, we got roads to fix. We got an education system that needs help. People can't afford homes. I'm a native Floridian. A lot of things have changed in this state that I don't like at all. And I think when you pull moves like that, it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, we're recording this the week of September 3rd, I guess. And at the end of this week, the Legislative Budget Commission is going to meet in Tallahassee. And part of what they're going to talk about is the economic outlook for our state. And based on what we've seen preliminarily in terms of what they're going to talk about, they're going to talk about some of the challenges that we're having with our economy in Florida. And when you take tax cut after tax cut, you're giving these tax cuts, but you're not really figuring out how to fill in those gaps with general revenue. It's just like, this is an oversimplification, but if you had a checkbook that you were trying to balance and you diminish the income that you were bringing in, but you kept spending, eventually you're going to be in the red, right? Like you're going to have a problem. And so what we're anticipating is they're going to talk about, some hard funding decisions and choices that we might have to make as a state, lest we wind up in the red, or having to make billions of dollars in cuts down the line. And so when I hear about things like that, when I get that kind of news, and then I see that we have a governor who is spending our hard-earned taxpayer dollars on things like political stunts.
Yeah.
When I see that we have a governor who refuses to accept Medicaid expansion, and this falls on the majority in the legislature too. They refuse to even have this conversation, which, by the way, Florida is now one of only 10 states that has refused to accept Medicaid expansion. And this would basically just allow us to draw down more of the federal dollars that we already send up to the federal government for this program. By not expanding Medicaid, it just means that other states are getting our funding. Okay, so all we're saying is let's draw down the maximum that we can, that we pay into that program. That would, by the way, free up $200 million in general revenue that could go towards things like enhancing our public schools or fixing our roads, things that you and I were just talking about. When we see that we have a governor who seems so focused on everything but leading the people in this state, it's a tough pill to swallow, because there's some folks out there who are really struggling. And to me, so many of these issues, by the way, yes, I know I'm the Democratic leader in the House, minority leader, however you want to say that. So many of these issues to me, Garrett, honestly, are not even partisan, right? It's like, how do we take care of people? That should not be a partisan issue.
And I said this before we went live. I believe we all have the same goals, right? We all want to get to the same place. Like, should housing be affordable for everyone? Sure. Is there going to be a mansion that 1% can afford? Yes. But should everyone in this country, and especially in this state, have the ability or the shot, the chance to buy a home for themselves. Yeah, it's the American dream. It's the foundation of our society. It's the greatest wealth building tool we have. And when you see federal dollars being handed out, whether it's on an affordable housing issue, transportation, for the last 20 years, the Republicans in the state have denied billions of dollars in transportation funds. One thing I'm trying to figure out, and I should get a Republican at the state on the show and talk about their position and all that. But why do you believe that the Republicans in this state don't want that Medicare help? They don't want funding for rail transportation system here in Florida to help us out with some of these traffic and transportation problems. Like, they just say no, 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 no. And then the Secretary of Transportation puts out this dramatic plan for America's essentially high-speed rail system and transit system. He identifies 30 metropolitan areas around the entire country. There wasn't one in Florida that was named on the list. It's politics. The reason we're not on the list is because we've been so against them and said no so many times that the federal government looks at us and goes, well, forget Florida. They're going to say no anyway, or they're going to turn something political. Like the Medicare point, right? That's purely political, right? Is there a real reason that the Republicans are giving you, right, the other party, when you have these discussions with them? Like, what are the, why would they make a decision like that to not draw down on those Medicare dollars?
Yeah, and it's Medicaid. I want to be clear. Yeah, we've got our own issues with Medicare, having a United States senator from this state, Rick Scott, who at one point said, he put out a plan to like completely gut Medicare, but the Medicaid program. And to answer your question, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's just partisan politics. Now, they might try to walk you down this road of, well, it actually wouldn't save us funding and general revenue. It would cost us money. I've heard that argument before, but I've also looked at this, including an analysis by an independent organization that like evaluates Florida tax policy. And so just looking at that, looking at what the net effect has been in other states who have expanded Medicaid, unfortunately, I think my colleagues across the aisle are just wrong on this one. I think it actually would be an economic boon to our state. It would help over 800,000 or nearly 800,000 Floridians who need access to health care get it, which, by the way, would help our costs, those of us who have access to health insurance. It would help our costs go down because going to the emergency room is the way a lot of folks who don't have health care, that's the way they go and get treatment, and that raises costs for all of us. So partisan. But when you were saying they say no, 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 I kind of smiled because what I want to say is, but the dirty little secret is how many times they say yes, yes, yes. So I got PolitiFacted on this, like PolitiCheck, you know what I'm saying? There's that PolitiFact, and they check what you say and verify it. And I'd said recently that 1 out of every $3 that Ron DeSantis spends, nearly 1 out of every $3 that our state government spends is a federal dollar. Did you know that?
No, I had no idea.
Florida's budget and economy depends heavily on resources that we get from the federal government.
That's probably true in every state, though, right?
Well, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
But that's what's so strange to me, though, right? It's like, but there's this kind of like smoke and mirrors where it's, well, we don't want to accept federal funds. Baby, you already do.
Yeah.
To the tune of 1 out of every $3.
And that's why I'm trying to figure out the legitimate argument that they have. What I hear is what you just said. No, we don't want, as an example, $3 billion in funding for high-speed rail in Florida, because if we take that $3 billion, then our taxpayers in Florida will be obligated to pay for this for the rest of our lives, and it's going to cost us, and we're going to be in the negative in the long run. There's always a talk with conservatives of spending. No, we don't want to spend it. No, right? But isn't it an investment? Like, isn't something like that an investment in Florida? Things cost money.
Yeah.
I mean, you're about to build golf courses on state parks. What's that about?
Come on now. Yeah.
It's just this weird thing. I don't know. I just feel like there's never a straight answer.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't think it's a weird thing at all. I mean, in the sense that I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. A lot of it is just, it's partisanship, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who wants to see our businesses thrive. I want to see our kids, when they graduate from our great colleges and universities here, be able to stay here and get a good paying job. I want us to attract the top talent all across the country and bring young people here. But a lot of what young people look at is, what are the transportation options? Like what transit do you have? Like they want to live in walkable cities. They want that urban density. They like that feel. Where can we offer that to them, but also make sure they have a good quality of life and don't have to spend 2 hours of their life in traffic every day. It is an investment in our state. It's an investment in, yes, the now, but also in the future. And how do we want to grow? Who do we want to be? I want to see us attract more businesses here. But I know that that's something that companies look at as well. Not to mention, they're looking at how our state's policies match up with their own company's policies. Will their employees feel safe bringing their whole selves to work? From a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. So there's a lot that's been happening at the state level, both proactively and then in terms of just obstructionism, that I feel like is holding our state's economy back and that is impacting our state's reputation on a national stage. And it's not helpful for growth or progress.
No, and that was expressed in the primary. DeSantis didn't do well here because, again, he pushed too hard on certain issues that people I shouldn't say don't care about, because there's plenty of people that care. But the idea that our well-being is under some of these political acts, like the Texas border thing, like the Martha's Vineyard thing, it's cute, fine, whatever. People might agree with that and think it's a good thing to do. But at the end of the day, a large majority of Floridians we're looking after ourselves and our community and our people and our family. Like, that's who we want helped. And when you go against that, it just disrespects the entire process.
Yeah. And by the way, it's disrespectful to those human beings who were trying to seek asylum in this country legally, trying to find their legal pathway to immigration. It's also corrupt, because you have folks who were involved, who were contractors, who happen to be big donors of DeSantis, who are getting these contracts with our taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, I saw that. Like the plane that was owned, that was used, was some sort of a donor to DeSantis, some private company. I don't want to speak out of line, but there was some weird shenanigans I saw in the paper about that.
Shenanigans, I like that word.
But also, too, with the border, right? That's an issue. Like, you got millions of people coming across. That is a problem. Unchecked, unvetted, if they're sneaking across.
My only suggestion is that that's a problem for the federal government, and that when it comes to our taxpayer dollars, we should be focused on what's happening in Florida. That's all. Yeah, it's a problem. Oh my gosh. You've seen administration after administration try to deal with that. Republicans and Democrats. Let's deal with it in a bipartisan way. But what you're not going to do, what you should not be doing, I will submit to you every time, is taking our taxpayer dollars and spending those in Texas.
Yeah.
On your friends' planes.
I wanted to ask you about that relationship between state and federal government. I totally agree with you. The federal government has their role. The state government has their role. And those are two different roles. Now, of course, there's an argument to be made, and I'm sure DeSantis would make the argument that if the federal government doesn't take the role seriously or doesn't fulfill whatever duty they have, then the state should step in. I'm sure that's what he would say, right? That's probably what he would say. But where do you see the relationship between the state government and federal government? It seems that left-leaning ideology and maybe the Democratic Party would like to see more government in general, right? That's what people think of, right? Republicans want less government, smaller government. Now, though, with everything you mentioned about all these issues, it's like everything's weird and washed out. Like, even some of the things the Republicans are fighting for are more regulation and more government. And then the Democrats almost have done things that allude to, well, is that the party of more choice? And right. And
yeah.
So it's like, personally, right, in your political career and your beliefs, what is your relationship? What do you believe the relationship is between Florida and the federal government?
Well, it's so interesting because I have a feeling my colleagues from across the aisle would say almost that it should be one of antagonism, right? And like that push and pull.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, there can be push and pull, but I think it's also smart to cooperate where it makes sense. Like, to me, the relationship is dependent upon the highest and best good for the people. Is it good for the people of our state? then maybe that's something we should look into. If it's not so great for the people of our state, then maybe we should get out of the way and just let that be what it is. I think the problem is, in the 6 years that I've been involved, I see a lot of doublespeak, right? Like, we don't want those federal funds. Oh, but it's okay for you to accept American Rescue Plan dollars and then kind of like wash that clean and make it look like it's state dollars and then give that out in the form of bonuses to teachers and law enforcement, which I'm all for the bonuses. Like,
Right.
that's not the issue. Please hear me when I say, like, let's honor the people and give respect where it's due. The challenge that I have is where, like, out of one corner of your mouth, you want to talk about Biden and try to blame him for inflation and do these funny stickers. I did that, whatever, when they were really trying to malign President Biden. But you're leaning on those dollars that you just got from the federal government to run these programs.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of double speak. And I think that's part of what turns people off to politics, by the way. Like, if it can be hard just to get a straight damn answer. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I believe that's the reason why Trump originally won in 2016, was because I think Americans in general, on both sides, were sick of that, right? Government is there to support and guarantee certain systems in this country, going back to the Constitution. And when it falls outside of that, which it kind of has, we've came a long way from there, it gets muddy and people get disinterested when that happens. And so I think going back to like the rail thing, saying no to $3 billion of federal money, but then you say yes to a couple billion here, and then you wash it out and give it to the teachers, and then it's, that party can use it for their platform. That's so wrong. Let's have an honest conversation about spending. Let's talk about where is the money coming from and where is it going? That's a big issue now. The spending thing is on the radar of both parties like never before, because traditionally government spending was always tight on the conservatives. And like we just talked about, right? The conservatives say no to these federal dollars, but now they're taking it in other places. Our inflation has been out of control. It's gone down where it's getting better. Interest rates are getting lower, which is good. All of that's cooling off. On the same side of it, it's kind of a natural thing. We had a pandemic come through. You have an entire country shut down. The federal government steps up and writes people a check for $1,400. People forget that was Trump. You talk about government spending. That was Donald Trump that spent trillions of dollars on all the COVID money. PPE stuff, all that sort of stuff. Right? People try to die on this sword on the conservative side about money, but those leaders have spent just as much, I feel like, as the left side. Where do you see spending? Spending is an issue. We need to figure out and consolidate, right? And spend money on things that we need. And stop pretending like, no, we're going to say no to that federal money over here, but then give me that check and then we'll put it over here. It's like, what?
Right. Like what you said, where's the honest, truthful conversation? And you can go back and look at Republican administrations. I think even dating back to Ronald Reagan, right? Like, he had the whole trickle down theory and like, you cut government spending and you cut taxes. I think what happened is that there were a lot of tax cuts, but not the decrease in government spending. And you can look at Democratic administrations and Republican administrations and probably find the same thing. So it's kind of like this misconception about how economies run when people are in charge. I will note that the last time that we had a balanced federal budget in this country was under Bill Clinton when he was president, and he's a Democrat. So that kind of gives you a sense, right, of, that sounds like a nice thing to say. I'm going to cut your taxes. I'm going to cut government spending. But the reality is, I don't think that happens too much.
No. And cutting your income and increasing your spending is like the complete recipe for disaster. It seems like that's what's happened at the federal level. But at the state level, we're doing all right. Aren't we making more money in revenues than we're spending?
Well, that's what I was alluding to when I told you about that Legislative Budget Commission.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets into just different theories about what we should be funding and what our priorities are in the state. You've got your general revenue. You've got funding dedicated to trust funds. What I've seen just in the 6 years that I've been there is that if there's not, something they want to spend general revenue on, they will go and raid a trust fund, which they're not supposed to do, and kind of convert those dollars to general revenue. I'm getting really like into nerdy legislative speak. And the point that I'm trying to make is, I don't think under the current leadership that we have in this legislature and in the governor's mansion, that our priorities are always in the right place in terms of state spending. So I think, for example, we should be spending more on affordable housing. In its wisdom, over 20 years ago, the legislature established the Sadowski Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And with every sale of property, a certain amount of the doc stamps are supposed to go to this trust fund to then invest in affordable housing, which I'm sure, as you know, a lot of times it's like, the local government, the state will pass those funds down to local governments who then work with developers and incentivize this type of housing, because developers have to be able to make some sort of a profit. But if they want to do well while doing good, affordable housing is a great way to do it. Year after year, the Republicans would just sweep funds from Sadowski, just sweep them, if they funded it at all. But now that Florida is experiencing this unprecedented growth and we're so popular, we're the third most populous state in the nation, we've got some real challenges with affordable housing. And now sweeping the trust fund all those years seems like it was a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, it was probably cute back in the day, but now more people live in Florida than in New York State.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing in the literal sense, but it's kind of frightening as a younger dude who's got a baby and a wife who's really trying to grow a business here.
Yeah.
When I bought, I've owned some real estate here in Tampa, and down in Sarasota, and I bought a house. The first house here I bought in Tampa was $349,000 in 2018. Get married, have a wife and a baby. If only a few years goes by, now I'm looking for a new house. Well, I had to spend a hell of a lot more than that to find something. A lot of the reason is the growth. So it's like, yes, it's amazing that we have more people than New York. And there is something cool, especially in a city, to see our downtown here in Tampa come back to life.
Yeah.
And all these new shops and restaurants all that comes with more money, right? Now we're able to improve our infrastructure, and the mayor's made a really big infrastructure push. And she was on the show 2 weeks ago and was talking about all the efforts they've done underground, which isn't sexy, but it's very necessary. The negative externalities from growth, I think, is kind of where we're at now. We're in this growing pain phase. The affordable housing thing, people didn't talk about that when I was in high school, or even as much as maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It wasn't that much of a conversation. Now it's almost like the most important part of the conversation is taking care of these native Floridians that woke up one day, hey, by the way, everything's twice as expensive.
Yeah.
Including your insurance, including your, mortgages are up double. Like, everything is so expensive now. That's a major problem.
Well, think about it. I mean, we've got so many seniors who are on fixed income. That's
Right.
tough. We've got another storm that's brewing with these condominium assessments. By the way, there have been some changes in the law in the wake of the Surfside tragedy where that condo collapsed in South Florida. So now we need to have these assessments. But again, a lot of folks on fixed income living in condos. And then you've got young people, young people graduating from college, young people, or maybe they went to get career and technical education, but they're playing by the rules. They're doing everything right. They want to stay in this community. How is it fair for us to say, well, sorry, you can't afford a place to live and we just got to ship you off to, wherever.
And what a shame.
And what a shame.
To lose a hardworking person that either chose to go to trade school or didn't go to any sort of school, but they're hardworking in general. They've done good business here. Or a college educated kid who's worked hard in school, got great grades. Maybe they got a good gig here in Tampa. They're doing okay. They're making okay money. Oh, guess what? You can't afford to live here.
Yep.
Well, maybe I'll go move to Charleston, South Carolina. Well, cool. We just lost that awesome individual. That's a shame.
Yeah. And so you're really getting into, right? Like, what's the business case for investing in infrastructure? What's the business case for investing in affordable housing? Because that young person probably came up through our public schools, right? Those are our taxpayer dollars. If they went to one of our amazing state schools, including University of South Florida, which is in my district, go Bulls, the Tampa campus is, maybe those are some bright futures dollars that were invested in that young person. And so now we've created this brain drain where we've got our talented young people leaving because they don't believe they can build a good life here because it's too expensive.
Is that something you and your party is focusing on pitching to the Republicans? Because the reality is you have to work with them, right? They are the ones that control the legislature. Obviously, we have elections coming up. You guys hope to change that. But if they're in power, you kind of have to work with them, correct? So is that your pitch to them? Like, look, does it cost money for these programs? Yes. Here's the ROI. Here's why it's a good thing to invest in infrastructure, affordable housing, all of these sort of issues. It will benefit us in the long run.
100%.
Yeah.
If you were to look at my caucus's policy platform, you would see not one culture war issue. You would see only bills that are dedicated
Is that
to
something we
improving.
could pull up?
Yeah. Well, probably.
Is
We could
there-
give you the bill
the-
numbers and you could look it up. I mean,
Is there a URL for Florida Democrats that have those policy issues listed?
we do have a website for the Florida House Democratic Caucus.
Maybe pull it up behind the scenes, David, and like if there's something that lists some of the issues, we could take a look. But I mean, we're talking about them, right? Affordable housing. Is affordable housing, you feel, obviously it's hard to cherry pick which issues are the most important, but is affordable housing one of your personal, like, okay, this is a huge issue we need to fix?
Can I just say generally it's affordability? Because
Affordability.
not everybody owns a home, not everybody rents, but affordability is being felt across the board regardless of your situation. So if you're a homeowner, it tends to be in the form of property insurance rates that have increased.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a home or to purchase or to rent, then it tends to be more affordable housing. But just affordability generally, I'm finding is the number one issue when we talk to people.
Yeah. And me personally, it's my issue, right? As a voter, as a Florida native, as a Tampa native, like my biggest problem is the affordability.
Mm-hmm.
I own a real estate business. I have a brokerage. We help people buy and sell homes. And then I own some investments. To be in real estate right now and to have what's happened in the last few years, the price escalation, insurance on this little building was like $6,600 for the year.
Oh my gosh.
A few years ago, it was $2,500.
Wow.
So you add that up to now, if you're 65 years old rich dude, real estate guy, maybe that sucks, but it's not career ending. For me, it is an absolute pinch point, and it's something that I've found has put me in this position where, damn, I can't do much. I got this insurance bill on that building I got to pay. Well, I would love to buy that and renovate it and make it beautiful and put a business in there, but I can't afford it because I've spent all my money on these other insurance policies, as an example, right? Just as an example. But to me, that's my biggest issue is affordability.
Yeah.
It's not even just real estate, by the way. I leased a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Okay. I go to the dealership to buy it. That payment, because I got an extended warranty, I'm trying to be smart. I'm just trying to do the right thing, by the way.
Just trying to do the right thing.
Just trying to do the right thing.
That's right.
And everything I do. Almost $700 payment.
Oh my God.
I leased it for 3 years. It's a used car. I try to do the right thing and buy the car I leased. Almost $700. I said, what's your average payment here? He's like, people walking out with $1,500 payments. He said, our average payment's about $700 here. And he said the average interest rate is 14%.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening right now in terms of affordability is not sustainable.
It's not. And part of the challenge, by the way, right? We saw rates of inflation go down in most other places in the country before Florida started to feel any semblance of relief. And a big part of that is because of housing costs. A big part of our issue is housing costs, and we need to fix it. We need to put aside partisanship, and we need to invest in affordable housing. We need to have real conversations in a bipartisan way around property insurance and how to fix that. And I got to be honest with you, if I had a legislative session where we didn't have to talk about a book ban or, where we didn't have to talk about pick your culture war, just fill it in.
Yeah.
I would be so happy because in my opinion, just my humble opinion, after being in this for 6 years, Florida has real challenges, not imagined challenges. We don't need to even look for them. We don't have to even look beyond our borders. We have real challenges right here that could occupy all of our time in a single legislative session. And I think that's what we should be focused on.
That's kind of disappointing for me to hear. How much % would you say is about some of that sort of stuff?
It's tough to quantify it.
But enough to where it takes away from the real work, is what you're saying.
100%. So you'll also find, I should say this, right? Like we always pride ourselves on saying that Tallahassee's not DC, and Tallahassee you can still get things done.
Yeah.
That's still got some truth to it, right? Like I don't want to completely malign Tallahassee. And most of the bills that we pass, like more than 50%, probably closer to like 75, 80% of the bills are going to pass unanimously, whether it's a Democratic bill or a Republican bill.
That's
There's actually a
encouraging.
lot of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you can find ways to work across the aisle. I know I've been blessed to get some really cool bills passed.
Yeah.
Like we got one that, for example, is in 2021 or 2022, 2021, thereabouts, when we had all the protests and everything that was going on. I worked with the Speaker of the House and we got a bipartisan police reform bill passed, which was kind of amazing. Like, you know, giving law enforcement the support that they need, but also finding ways to be more transparent with the community. So it was this good bipartisan moment. I've been able to get bills passed protecting African-American cemeteries and providing resources all throughout the state for abandoned cemeteries, which has been a cool, like, bipartisan thing because everybody
Huge.
understands heritage,
Huge
right?
conversation here in Tampa.
Right,
Zion
huge.
Cemetery, Water
Yes.
Street was built on an African-American cemetery.
Yes.
Did you know that area of downtown where Water Street is was all founded by black settlers?
I did know that.
So we had on Fred Hearns and Ashley Morrow with
Oh, cool.
Tampa Bay History Center.
Uh-huh.
Fred Hearns knows everything about Black history here locally in Tampa Bay.
Yes.
And he detailed me all of these stories from the past. It was insane. The amount of Black families that settled and farmed the areas out directly outside of downtown Tampa. Like if you look at a map, it was like 30-40% of downtown was all Black families. So where did they bury their families? Well, right there on the farm, right? Talk about Black cemeteries. I feel like in Tampa, there's a dozen of them that have been in the news. Robles Park came up, Zion came up, Water Street had one. It's like every time we turn around, boom, there's another one right there. Those have to be protected and preserved.
Yeah.
So you got that passed.
Yeah, we did. It was amazing, right? And I could not have done that without support from my colleagues across the aisle.
Right.
What I will say is that 10, 15, 20%, wherever it is where we disagree, the impact of that is starting to become so outsized and it starts to dominate the conversation. And that to me takes the focus off of the important work that we do. And we should be focused more on those solutions that are, you know, improving everyday lives.
Relating to the affordability, where do you find common ground with the other side?
That we know it's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will tell you that what we've advocated for over the years is, you know, stop sweeping the Sadowski Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The good news is that we passed a bipartisan law that says they can no longer sweep that trust fund. The problem is that same law basically cut the size of the trust fund to a third of what it had been previously. So even though it's getting fully funded, it's like 2/3 less than what it should be, which I don't think is commensurate with the growth that we're having in our state.
When was that?
Gee, that was in the last few years.
But with all of the affordability issues we've had, why would they cut it by a third? Good question.
Garrett.
Huh. Some of the stuff is deeper than I understand, right? I mean, and I think for any voter who, look, we're not supposed to pay attention. That's your job. We're not supposed to pay attention to this, right? That's the people of Florida. Just, you know, we have families and lives and businesses, and we're just going about our days hoping that the people in charge do the right thing, right? All these intricacies, right? On that point, why would a third of that budget get cut? Is it political leverage the other side is trying to use? Hey, we'll give you that, but we want to take that money out and put it here. Like, you're on the inside. What's up? Is that what it is? Is it all political?
I think a lot of it boils down to politics for sure. I think part of it maybe is also just a different opinion in worldview.
Sure.
And how to fund things and what priorities should be. The problem is the impact doesn't care about the partisanship, right? Like the impact is downstream from the partisanship. And what we really should be concerned about is, so then what's the impact of now funding affordable housing at 2/3 less than what it had been,
At
right?
such a
Like
critical
that's
time.
at such a critical time. So we had a couple years ago too, this affordable housing bill. I was honored to vote for it. It was put forward by the Senate president, who's a Republican, Kathleen Passidomo. I think it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It wasn't unanimous, but a lot of bipartisan support. and the Live Local Act, and it put like over $800 million into affordable housing, which was a big reason why I voted for it. But the reality is that bill, it's kind of like a drop in the bucket compared to what we really need just because of all the growth that we've had in our state. So my hope is that because the people are now talking about this issue, like you mentioned, folks weren't talking about this 5 years ago or when you were in high school or whatever. Now that the people are talking about this, we have to pay closer attention to it. We have to find more solutions. And so that gives me some hope, right, for positive movement and the possibility of change. But listen, my caucus, what we say, our mantra is that every Floridian deserves the freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. That's regardless of your background, your race, your religion, who you love, what your zip code is. If it's helping you to lead a better, safer, healthier, like more full life, we're going to try to pursue that. And affordable housing certainly is a big component.
Massive component. How does the money play out for your caucus? So, $800 million is in an affordable housing or is earmarked for affordable housing. How does that play out? Is the government going to swing hammers and build the houses?
So no, at the state level, we've got two programs. One is SHIP, and that's for investment in actual single family homes, and then their sale, that's for multifamily. A lot of those funds from the state get sent down to local governments to then disperse in the forms of maybe grants or however they would fund programs for affordable housing. So the state is like almost like the clearinghouse.
Oh, here we
Look
go.
at that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
David, you're a magician. Okay. Appropriation of housing trust fund monies. So the governor has his own column, meaning the governor's office can allocate funds towards certain things outside of the legislature?
No, meaning that the governor will put forward his proposed budget. Like, this is how I think the funds should be spent. But at the end of the day, it's up to the legislature to pass a budget.
Got it. Wow. A lot of commas, a lot of zeros here.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, in the scheme of things, people need to understand how many people live in Florida, the size of our economy. You might even have to add another zero at the end for it to truly fix everything, which is kind of a crazy thought, right? Is like, how far behind are we? Number one and number two, can we even get back to the numbers I was talking about? Can my baby, when he's 20 years old, buy a house for $350, $450 in Tampa? That I think a lot of people need to come to terms with. What once was might never be again. And that house that was 400 a few years ago, you might never see that number. But I think the idea of government is to help sustain us for as long as possible and help hedge some of the natural market demand, right? A perfect example is what's happening right now. We know the people are moving here. Every demographic study, migration pattern points to Florida growing for decades to come. It's like, dude, we know the people are moving here. I feel like some of the comments on social that we get and some of the things people say to me allude to this almost like bury your head in the sand thing. Like, don't tell people about Florida, stop people from moving here. But it's like, what do you want to do? Build a wall around Florida? Like, people are moving here whether we like it or not. It's how we grow. I think I stole that from you. You just said that. How are we going to grow, right? Not if, not when, like, it's coming. What are we going to do to help hedge this growth and make it as sustainable as possible for as long as we can? That home will never be $400,000 again, but could we extend the period of time? So instead of going from 350 to 700, instead of doubling in 24 months, maybe it'll double in 48 months. And maybe that'll help the young family like me. I was looking for a home this summer, right? Maybe you can extend it through government. But I also, personally, it's up to the free market in so many ways.
Yes. Well, so I think that that's part of the role of government, right? Is to help make sure that there are healthy markets, to help make sure that whatever is our regulatory footprint, that makes sense, right? So that people can thrive and businesses can thrive. And when it comes to affordable housing, a lot of it's around inventory, right? Like, if there's not enough housing, there's not enough supply, but demand is really high, what's going to happen with prices? They're going to increase. So part of the role of government, as I view it, is to have these programs. And in Florida, again, we were funding these through doc stamps. Doc stamps are the taxes that are generated from real estate sales. What a smart way to fund future growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just think that we should not have diminished that by 2/3, and we should have really been investing in this all along. But here we are. We have to do what we can. I wanted to actually, could you go back up to that prior page? Yeah, there was something I wanted to point out actually that was pretty cool. Hometown Heroes. You see it at $100 million. That was a nice bipartisan moment, just to give the listeners a little bit of like hope and sunshine. That's a program that goes to help our first responders purchase their first homes. So that's a pretty cool program where everybody felt good about it, understanding that there are a lot of folks who put their lives on the line and are in those types of professions where maybe they don't make, their salary is not commensurate with the service that they give to our community, if you will. And so that was a really nice one with housing that I wanted to point out.
That's fantastic. It's such a great program. And I believe it's been extended and expanded, correct?
Yes.
Since the inception.
Right. I think that represents, what are we in 2024? I feel like that.
It was over a
year
ago.
2023 might have been the first year. Now, I'm from Polk County, as we would say, don't get me to lying. I'd have to go back and look. Sometimes 6 years of policies and budgets kind of get jumbled. But I will tell you that we definitely renewed the program this year, and it's been really popular. And that's something I've been really honored to support.
Let me ask you real quick about your sheriff over there in Polk County.
Mm-hmm.
Grady?
Mm-hmm.
Grady Judd?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about safety, right? On this conversation could be 10 hours long. So let me try to be concise in my question. But I just wanted to ask, safety, right? I think people in Florida watch the news, and maybe, the news shows us what they want us to see, right? But in states like out west, California, Oregon, Washington, it seems like the law and order aspect has almost been too soft. Florida has always had reasonably strong law and order laws, and we've had sheriffs that kind of take that cowboy approach with their rhetoric. And it seems like people in Florida at least appreciate it and feel like it's helpful with crime. Where's the line, right? Like, obviously, we need to have law and order in order to have a civil society, in order to have our economy keep growing and people's livelihoods to improve. You can't disrupt that with crime. I think the lackadaisical approach out west and some of those way more left-leaning states has hurt them in terms of crime. Now they're dealing with a lot more people and a lot more complicated issues than we are. Mm-hmm. We're lucky we have like half the population California does. I think California is 38 million, something crazy. So they kind of have more challenges. People look at that though, they're like, holy shit, I hope that doesn't happen to Florida. And with the migration pattern, it seems like we're going to have a lot of people here shortly. What are your thoughts on some of those more traditional, I guess, Republican or conservative approaches to crime and safety,
Now you're like, you want to get deep. You want to talk about like social determinants of crime. Do you want to talk about whether policies are actually deterrents? This is what I would say. All right. Because I know we don't have all day to go into all of these theories. What helps reduce crime is economic opportunity and making sure that communities are thriving. It's not necessarily harsher laws that help. We have to have law and order. Like, please don't mistake that. But I've kind of watched my colleagues across the aisle with this approach of, if we just increase the penalty for this thing and we just talk about it real harsh, that's going to stop people from engaging in crime. And the reality is it's a much richer conversation than that in terms of the economic opportunity that people have. Are we providing opportunities for our kids? During the summer when there's not a lot for them to do and they just got a bunch of time on their hands, like what type of community are we building and are we investing in? I will say that I've seen a lot of politicians in the law enforcement arena try to use tough talk just to bolster their own profile. But I really question, does that help our community be any safer? Them doing their job helps our community be safer. Us having smart policies on crime helps our communities to be safer, and certainly providing economic opportunity so people have, better pathways helps our communities to be safer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, truthfully, because it's more of a focus on, hey, look, the foundation of opportunities for people will solve for those higher arching crime issues. I think you saw a lot of that, especially during 2020 with George Floyd and the backlash and all of those changes. And the silver lining on some of those issues is that you did get those bills passed with the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Relating to what was that specific law that you passed? Oh, police reform, right? Police reform, where you're kind of appeasing, you're trying to appease both sides. Where should we defund the police? No, we need more money for training. Those police officers should be more trained in some of these social issues and showing up to a call where maybe someone's mentally unstable. Police officers should be prepared for that. Maybe there should be an office of police that are specifically trained, like almost like a special operations unit where they're kind of going in to fulfill more of a social role versus a, well, crime and safety is always number one, but versus a, hey, let's arrest this person and bring them in
Mm-hmm.
role. That's important too. Sounds like you work through that. Um, yeah, I just think that it seems like there have been a lot of different ideas around the country, which is
Mm-hmm.
good. That's why this country's beautiful, because each state can kind of figure out what they need to do for their people. But I also believe Polk County's problems are different from Los Angeles County, and it's a different culture and it's a different people. And Los Angeles County has like 6 or 8, maybe more, 12 million people. And maybe you can talk the talk in Polk County, but could you really have that same rhetoric and those same hard
Mm.
lines in Los Angeles County? Would it be effective, or would it be more effective to figure out the foundation and economics and what are kids doing after school? What are kids doing during the summer?
Yeah, and
You know?
invest, right? Like invest in those programs. For example, in Lakeland, they have a really strong presence with the Police Athletic League. I grew up in Lakeland. I never participated in PAL, but I had a lot of friends who did. That gets a young person to see a different side of a law enforcement officer,
Mm.
right? Like there's so many different ways to build up the relationships that we need between our communities and law enforcement. And there's some local governments in the area that are doing really well with this. Like I know over in Pinellas County and St. Pete, I feel like they've got some very good programs. In Pasco County, I've even done ride-alongs where I saw how their sheriff's office approaches these mental health calls, like you mentioned. I think increasingly our law enforcement officers are being put in situations where this isn't really what they signed up for. So how can we be best supportive of them while also meeting our community needs? Because by the way, I don't even like that language, like supportive of them. Like we're all we're all in community, right? But how can we be supportive of our men and women who are working so hard to keep our community safe and uplift them, see them get paid what they're worth, see them get trained to meet the moments that they're asked to meet, but then also provide any sort of supplemental services that might be more appropriate if it's a call that's, a service call and it's something about a mental health disturbance.
Men and women, right? You said it. They're people, they're human beings. They
Yeah.
have their own emotions. And when all you're doing every day is arresting people and there's just this extreme negativity about people, and I'm not speaking for all cops, right? This happens in certain circumstances where you can tell from a horrible incident, a video is released and you can just tell the cop is almost escalating on purpose and looking for a fight. I think also getting out the cops that are bad apples quickly is very
Mm-hmm.
important. And I know locally, like the good news is locally when it comes to law enforcement, I think our leaders do a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really seems like the initiative, and it probably helps that you have the chief of police as the mayor in Tampa, right? Or the former chief of police as the
Mm-hmm.
mayor, right? She kind of knows that side of it. But it does seem like locally Tampa PD and Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office have done a good job at the community outreach type stuff. But I also think they need to look inside of themselves. Who are the people that are working in your department? And I don't mean bad apples as in like this is a bad person trying to cause harm to the community. I mean like mental health of their own officers. A Hillsborough County Sheriff's officer just killed himself downtown like a
Mm.
week ago,
Yeah.
right
That was
downtown.
so hard. Oh, it was
Horrible.
awful.
So looking at that, okay,
Mm.
what has he been involved in at the sheriff's office? What kind of calls has he been on? There's almost this like therapeutic mental health esque part of law enforcement that should probably be expanded to help solve for some of these issues. Like that guy needed to be taken care of. It sucks that he felt the way he did. Maybe he felt alone. Maybe he went on a horrible call that he just couldn't get out of his head. Maybe he did something he wasn't supposed to do. Maybe he tried to do something. Whatever the reason was, it's a horrible thing. But I also think it relates to some of the reasons there are tiffs between certain neighborhoods and police. Like there's this disconnect with certain cops that shouldn't occur. Like, let's look internally, I feel like, with safety. Let's look inside of the department, not just hire this social worker to go on this call or let's throw money at this thing. No, we should look at internals and really take care of these people.
Yeah, make sure that our law enforcement have what they need, right?
Yeah.
Like make sure. I will say too that in Florida we have a commission on mental health. Actually, I think the current chair, I think her role might be current chair, but Representative Christine Hunchofsky, who's a member of the Florida House Democratic Caucus, has a very prominent role in helping to lead that commission. She actually was the mayor of Parkland at the time of that tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School back in 2018. But I say all that to say, she keeps me posted on what the commission's working on. And I know that a lot of it, they do look into trying to make sure that we have support, not just out in the community, but for our first responders as well.
Let's move on. I wanted to go back to insurance real quick. That's just a whole fiasco. Prices have risen so dramatically. What do you think the way out of that is? What is the legislature doing right now to solve for that? Because that's a big pinch point.
If I'm honest, I haven't seen the legislature do much lately. There was a special legislative session a year or two ago, where there was what I view as like a $3 billion bailout to the property insurance industry, particularly with the reinsurance market. That's where a lot of folks will tell you that where we have the problems, that the property insurance companies will, issue policies throughout the state, but then they need to spread their risk. And so that's what reinsurance policies for. That's what that market is for. But that market has been unstable for some time. And so, folks will differ on how to help that market improve itself. The legislature, with the current majority that we have, basically passed a bill that gives a $3 billion bailout to that part of the industry. And they're basically like, now we just got to wait and see what happens. So we haven't seen any major property insurance reform bills since that time. I'll tell you that since that time, rates have only increased as well. So I think it's time to start having some real conversations, regardless of who, from whatever party the person is. If they've got a good idea, we should be listening to it, because what I'm hearing from homeowners in my constituents, they want some consumer friendly policies too, with respect to reforming this market. It's like, well, if the industry can get a $3 billion bailout, what about me? What are you going to do for me to put more money in my pocket? So I think it's a very complex issue. But I think, unfortunately, so far the conversations have been one-sided, and that's not getting it done. There also, I should mention this, there was a bill passed at around that same time that makes it more difficult for homeowners to hold their property insurance companies accountable, because it used to be that if you sue, and you win, you recover, you get your attorney's fees. The legislature kind of gutted that and makes it more difficult now for people to be able to recover their fees.
Yeah.
Well, mom and pop homeowners don't have the tens and thousands of dollars to go up against a big insurance company. So to me, that was a failure of the legislature too. At the same time that you're giving these guys a bailout, you're making it harder for homeowners to hold those companies accountable. I couldn't make that make sense if I tried.
No, that's a weird one to work through. And you're right about the complexity of the insurance issue, because all the while this entire conversation's happening, hurricanes are still hitting us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So knock on wood, a big one doesn't come through right now while we're still working on all this insurance stuff. That's the last thing we need, is a huge, premium dump where you have billions of dollars of damage. It's weird too, like $3 billion bailout. Why didn't they put something in there that said, hey, we're going to give you the $3 billion, but your rates are capped for consumers at X?
Great question, Garrett. We certainly had amendments that would have put forward ideas like that, and they were all basically either shot down along party lines or not even heard.
Why?
Ah.
But I mean,
it's the same thing we keep going back to, right? It's either partisanship or it could be just a different way to see the world. But to me, it's like, why can't we even have a conversation maybe about our seniors, like our seniors, you know what I mean, who are on fixed income? Why couldn't we even have a conversation for them?
My whole thing is like, why don't you have the answer? Like, why don't you know? Like if they're coming to the table and saying, hey, $3 billion bailout, insurance companies, they need it. They have no money. They can't even pay out these policies with these destroyed homes. Fine. Why haven't they told you? Because you're almost guessing. You're like, I don't know if it's in some sort of a worldview of XYZ. I don't know if it's this. Like, why wasn't there at least a conversation with you guys with these amendments regarding, hey, you can't charge more than, I don't know, X percent of a home's value or whatever the roadblock would be for the consumer? Why do they get bailed out and then the consumers have to pay all this insane money? Why are the insurance companies getting, I understand why they're getting bailouts, but why are they getting favored over Floridians? That's what's weird.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to a few different attorneys about the issue, and my understanding is basically, you know how you see those billboards where it's like, hey, you don't owe money until we win, right? If we win, we recover the money and pay all the attorney's fees. Some sort of new law disrupts that traditional system with insurance companies where the consumer has to front the money to sue the insurance company or something like that. Am I wrong?
No, this is what I was talking about when they made it more difficult now for homeowners to be able to hold their insurers accountable. I mean, I will tell you that at the time we were debating that bailout that I was telling you about, I know someone who was still going 12 rounds with her property insurance company over a claim stemming from Hurricane Michael. And Hurricane Michael was several years ago. Yes, she lives in the Panhandle. So, my whole thing is, if we're going to have conversations about solutions, can we do that in a balanced way? I hear you. You want the property insurance market to thrive. We need a healthy market, right? Like that's going to help us have better rates. But in the meantime, what are we doing for consumers? Why is it that consumers and taxpayers are the only ones who are bearing the brunt of this? And then to your question, right? Like, why can't we even get an honest answer? We could ask that about any issue that we deal with in the legislature.
It seems like you have found common ground though on some issues, which is good news. But is there any formal process that puts your ideas together? Like, is there like, hey, every month we meet for a legislative workshop and 5 members of each side of the aisle get together and talk about solutions? Is that a thing?
That's not a thing. Oh my gosh, I wish that it were.
Why would that not be a thing?
Well, I wish that it were a thing. I think that it should be a thing. Honestly, when I was running for office, I wasn't so naive to think that being in the minority party that I'd get all of my big initiatives passed.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I hoped for was that it would be a real exchange and dialogue about ideas. And unfortunately, it's not always that, because the party who has the gavel, they just run with it. And in our state, that means that Republicans have been running with the gavel in the state legislature, whether really the state government since 1998. They've had control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. And so they don't always make room for those opposing viewpoints.
That's probably the reason people like you get into government, though, because you're excited about solutions and ideas and thought processes from one differing opinion to another, and then taking those different opinions and forming solutions for the people. We went straight into the issues. We never really talked about your inspiration to get involved, but I would imagine a lot of people in the legislature are good people that want to make positive changes. But without a dialogue, what are you guys doing? Just coming to the table with your own ideas and then they go, no, we're not going to do it that way.
Yeah, that happens a lot. That happens more often than you would think.
It's a miracle you get anything done.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
Is that something that you could push for as the minority leader is say, hey, like, let's have a session, a dedicated session where we can come together and we can talk about our different ideas and form a solution.
It's something that we certainly do push for, right? So as minority leader, part of my job is to advocate for my members who
Right.
represent districts just like any Republican does, right? We represent millions of Floridians as well, and we push to have those ideas heard in the form of bills that get agendaed during the committee process, the committee hearing process. So we push for that. I will say, actually, last session, there was a workshop on the property insurance market that was led by, or at least there was a presentation given by a Republican and a Democrat on potential solutions for the market. So that was encouraging. I feel like that was the first time that had been done since I've been in the legislature these past 6 years. So it happens on occasion. I think the challenge is that it doesn't happen often enough. And I think people elect us to the legislature to go do serious business, to be about the business of the people. And unfortunately, just a lot of politics get in the way.
Especially lately.
Yeah. And it's unnecessary.
Yeah,
But
COVID kind of exacerbated a lot of those societal and social issues that I don't think were necessarily on the table as much as they were in years past. And again, they were there, but COVID exacerbated things. And unfortunately, we haven't fallen out of that here in Florida. I think there was so much attention on us, right? There was so much attention because Florida's open, Florida's doing this the different way, and all these states want this, and Florida's, going this direction. And I think that doesn't seem to have slowed down. Like the state park thing. What the hell is the state park? What are they trying to do? Put golf courses on a state park? I mean, what's up? What is that?
Yeah. So there was this whole plan that I don't think was secret, but it was kind of just like in plain sight where they were exploring developing certain areas of state parks, like adding lodging, adding retail, adding all of this stuff. And that was part of really, it came from the Department of Environmental Protection. So that's a state agency, that's executive branch, that's DeSantis, right? Like this is his agency that's putting forward this plan. And the backlash was vocal and swift, not just from Democrats either, right?
Oh.
Like from Republicans too.
I would even argue like almost more so that Republicans and conservatives were mad about it.
Well, I mean, we should all be mad about it.
We should all be mad about it.
Right?
But I'm saying like the response from the right was very strong.
Yeah.
Completely against that.
Yeah.
And we should probably say too, that may have been a conceptual plan versus I think what people have in their head is like these guys putting their hands together saying, here's an idea. Let's try to make some extra money from state parks with golf courses. But it could have just been like an idea on paper, like literally a conceptual thing that was leaked before it was really put in practice. But you never know. I don't know. Maybe it was a grand plan. You might know more than me.
I think that's how stuff becomes reality, is it slowly trickles out as a workshop or something like maybe this is possibly an idea. And then you come back, the next committee hearing and it's like, well, this is what a bill could look like on that idea. And that's how proposals advance. So I'm glad that it got out in the open when it did. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that the public was paying attention and people value our natural resources. That's like the state parks are like the sanctity. They help preserve the sanctity and beauty that is Florida, like our natural beauty. So, no, man, we don't want to develop those in the golf courses. We've got plenty of those.
Florida's nothing without them, frankly. If we don't have our natural, beautiful environment here in Florida, we're all in trouble. Yeah. So I'm glad that the public of Florida stood up and put a stop to that almost immediately. Mm-hmm. Before it even got out of the ground, all Floridians stood up and said, no way, dude. No way. And they took the whole thing back, as far as I know.
Yeah.
They've kind of scrapped. Never mind.
Like, whoa, hey, wait, that was just I don't know what they said it was, but they said it's not real. But can we like kind of use that to just as a jumping off point to give voters some encouragement out there? Because I know elections can feel very heavy, politics can feel very heavy, and maybe there are people who feel like their voice don't matter. But I think the state parks issue is a great example of why people should be engaged and why their vote matters, right? And their voice matters. We need all voters in this process to speak up and speak out because you matter.
We have complete control of this if we care enough. If we care enough as Floridians and as Americans, like if we all get together towards one goal, we can make it happen.
Yeah.
Let's end with that. Fentrice, thank you for being here. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Thank you guys for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like it. Check us out on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, give us a comment, give us some feedback. We want to know how we're doing. Thanks for watching. Bye, everybody.